I'm a storyteller, not a robot.
Hey, what do you have against robots? And is your claim to fame really gonna be Gigachad? Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here, and today we have another localization fail to investigate. If you've been watching Don't Tease Me, Miss Nagatoro on Crunchyroll, you're probably familiar with how the subs use the word sus in an attempt to reference that stupid, overdone meme from Among Us. Well, the trend continues in Season 2, as the subtitles make reference to Chad and Gigachad respectively. This is a fail because we know damn well that Nagatoro isn't using any of those terms, and I can guarantee a more faithful alternative was available. Luckily, the localizer responsible for this change has come out on Twitter to defend their actions, and in my opinion, they fall flat on their face in the process. They make a handful of bad takes that are iconic of the toxic philosophy localizers go by, so let's use this as a chance to counter their false ideas. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to like, comment, share, and smash that subscription bell as if it were your waifu. Consider supporting the channel by becoming a paid member on YouTube, Subscribestar, or Patreon. All three platforms offer the same perks, such as early access and exclusive content like my Lessons in Magecraft series. Before we tackle the main event, I'd like to take this opportunity to clarify something that I'm afraid you might be misunderstanding me on. I admit that I've been pretty aggressive in prior critiques, heavily using the terms woke and wokalizer to describe the current state of localization. This is not to imply that censorship is exclusively propagated by leftist politics. I generally despise the binary political sphere America is bound by, and feel that both extremes of the political spectrum are to blame. It's not even a matter of what politics a person holds, but rather the fact that they let those politics and beliefs taint the anime we enjoy. It's just that, at the current state, the vast majority of anime censorship is being done over matters of woke sensitivity. By that, I mean the social drive to push diversity and political correctness. Those matters should be between you and your ballot, and unless an anime or game specifically embraces those issues, it shouldn't be altered by any third parties. Back in the day, the tables were actually turned, with a lot of censorship coming from conservative puritanism. Look no further than Sailor Moon's original English dub, which infamously made Michiru and Haruka, or Sailor Neptune and Uranus, into straight cousins rather than lesbians. It's pretty easy to guess how the localizers were either homophobic themselves, or concerned that bigoted parents would throw a tantrum that a TV series is turning their kids gay. It had to be something along those lines. I feel it's safe to say that pretty much everyone thinks that that was a bad localization change, and rejoice that later dubs have restored the couple to their correct sexuality. In that example, it's important to realize that the reason why it was better for Michiru and Haruka to be lovers wasn't because the world needed more queer representation. It wasn't some larger statement like that. Rather, they should be lovers because that's how the original Japanese version had them. Them being lesbian is authentic. I can't help but feel a lot of people missed that point, and are now causing the exact same censorship just from a different political agenda. I don't care what you consider to be insensitive, what's in the Japanese original should stay, and all we fans are asking for is to overcome the language barrier. All censorship is bad, it's just that vocalization is all the rage. Please bear that in mind, as any vitriol or criticism I put out is aimed solely at those who think their personal sensibilities justify altering someone else's art. That's the sentiment at the core of today's issue. With that out of the way, let's look at the Nagatoro debacle. Today's fail comes to you by Melly Grand, someone who introduces themselves as a writer, not a translator. It's actually worth noting how often matters of localization aren't actually a translation issue. All this talk about there not being a perfect one-to-one translation for certain lines is irrelevant because the writers aren't even trying to be accurate. What we often point out is that what we're given isn't even a translation at all. Rather, the industry hires scriptwriters to take translations and rewrite them for the final draft. To give the industry some credit, there are circumstances where having a separate writer would be beneficial. Melly, for instance, says they're an ADR scriptwriter, a job that involves altering dialogue to fit lip flaps. Sometimes the most accurate translation, when spoken aloud in English, simply doesn't match the timing or syllable count of the original Japanese line. It helps to have a wordsmith, a human thesaurus as it were, to expand or contract a sentence with fluff words that don't change a line's context. You know, stuff like saying, "thank you very much," rather than just "thank you." The issue here is that, since these are only subtitles, there's no need to alter a translation if it already sounds fine. There is a degree to which a translated sentence can benefit from polishing, but that's only to make it flow better, and I feel the bulk of that polishing is already done by the translators. Another reason for hiring a separate writer might be for song lyrics. Just like lip flaps, a song translation, if you actually plan on singing it in another language, needs to watch the number of syllables. This also involves trying to make words rhyme, or perhaps substituting a word so that its sung vowels match what they were in Japanese. Naturally, a song translation walks along a fence between being true to the actual words and still sounding like a song. To that extent, I can definitely understand and even appreciate some creative liberties given that challenge. Perhaps the most common challenge translators face is when anime has specific jokes or references baked into the language itself. I'm not talking about cultural references, but rather situations that only make sense in Japanese, with no English equivalent. It's a problem worth addressing, whether you try to substitute that wordplay or simply attach it as a translator's note. Personally, I'm all for normalizing translators' notes whenever possible, because sometimes substitutions just aren't acceptable. A brilliant example of this can be seen in Promised Neverland. The kids in the story love playing tag, and they eventually start using tag as a way to escape their mama, who plans to ship them off as food for demons. The Japanese term for tag is called onigoko, which literally translates to demon play. Normally, the reference to oni isn't meant to be dangerous, but it has a double meaning in this anime because the kids wind up actually running from demons. While it's not critical to the story or anything like that, it's a fun play on words that gets lost when you simply translate it to a game of tag. Of course, I would never expect a translator or localizer to use any other word than tag for their English adaptation. That's effectively what it is. Anything else would be silly, but if we normalized translators' notes, a tiny sentence could let viewers know what they're missing, should they opt into it. Not every anime fan is looking to learn from their entertainment, but a lot of them would enjoy it if it were made as an option. Additionally, there are times when Japanese puns can be adapted to English without too much of a change. A great example can be seen with the fan subs done by Subs Please for Buddy Daddies, another anime airing this season. In episode 2, we've got an adult asking a little girl about where she lives so she can send her home. In Japanese, he asks for her address, or jusho, and the girl adorably mistakes the word for juice, or jusu. The conversation makes no sense when translated, because address sounds nothing like juice. In this situation, it can be very helpful to have someone with a vast English vocabulary who can substitute either of the terms to create a similar, harmless wordplay. The translator here chose to change address into jurisdiction, which still starts with the ju sound in juice. It fits within the context of the scene because jurisdiction refers to a region or territory, and it's a more advanced word than a child would normally use. Another option would be to change the word juice instead of address. Maybe something like adventure. A little girl might get excited by the word if she's not fully paying attention. It's not as good of a solution as jurisdiction, but I certainly would never complain about a change that small given the pun. The thing is, nobody out there has an issue with these sorts of changes, but rather when a separate writer abuses their power to make changes that weren't warranted. Oftentimes, localizers will say they tried to maintain the spirit of the original text, and while that is a fine sentiment, most of the people using that excuse are essentially just defending some variation of the old, "I changed rice balls into jelly donuts because Westerners aren't as familiar with rice balls." The industry is operating off a myth that, by changing an anime to appeal to Western standards, the product will sell better. I say this is a myth because whenever an anime comes out with a butchered localization, nobody can say for sure whether that same anime would have sold better or worse with a more faithful localization. All that companies can see is whether the version they put out sold well or not. The only way to truly test their conviction would be to go back in time, give the property its authentic version, and give it a fair shot with the same amount of funding and advertising. While I just said it's impossible to test, I still suspect that the authentic version would do better. Everyone's going off of success stories like Pokemon, but I think it would be arrogant to assume that Pokemon succeeded in the West because they pulled crap like the jelly donut thing. That, and Pokemon was marketed to children who didn't know any better. The climate for anime has certainly changed, and given the overwhelming popularity of anime and manga overseas, it's no surprise that most fans would prefer an authentic version. I'm sure that if companies released both a faithful and heavily localized version simultaneously, for the same price, the faithful version would definitely sell better, especially if word got out that the localized version had less content. There are customers who will buy an anime or game without caring if it's censored, so long as the core experience is intact. These sorts of people will buy it regardless of whether it's accurate or not. There are also customers who refuse to buy a work that gets censored, and I can guarantee they compose a larger audience than any customers who buy anime exclusively because of the changes localizers make. I get it, people love memes, but that shouldn't be forced into official localizations. Save that for an abridged series. What Melly Grant has done with Nagatoro qualifies as nothing more than an attempt to spice up or flavor dialogue to entice English speakers. As a subtitle, there's no restriction on syllable count, and this Gigachad line is definitely not substituting for a Japanese-specific word pun. Rather, the words Nagatoro actually speaks in Japanese have a perfectly serviceable translation on their own. If anything, what she says is culturally neutral, whereas Melly's version will only make sense to a specific demographic. What Nagatoro actually says is, "Are you trying to become a man by not wearing glasses?" The key words being otoko ni naro, or being a man. This could be polished to, "Do you think you'll be more manly without glasses?" Or, "Are you trying contacts in order to appear more manly?" When you look at the classic Gigachad meme, you think of a big muscle head or a jock, and honestly, either of those words would have done better than Gigachad itself. Still, Nagatoro doesn't even mention being muscular. The idea itself is pretty dumb, considering nobody thinks taking their glasses off makes them beefier. If anything, manly might refer to confidence or being handsome. Another issue with this line is that Nagatoro never calls her senpai a four-eyed dork. You might argue that this is what Nagatoro is implying, but the fact that she doesn't actually say it is valuable. Melly is taking megane ko yamete, or stop wearing glasses, and forcing it to be stop being a dork. That's a false equivalence. You can't even argue that this is something Nagatoro would say, because she specifically didn't say that. Again, it would be arrogant to assume anyone knows the character more than her own writer, and that leads us to this video's namesake. In one of the most ironic statements ever uttered, Melly says that they write to honor the spirit of the scene while describing themselves as a storyteller, not a robot. It's ironic because the statement itself actually dishonors the original work and its artist. Melly's operating on another myth, that a proper translation of the Japanese dialogue doesn't pop on its own. Words themselves are less important than the way in which you say them. For example, you can tell someone you love them in a way that implies you want to break their flimsy little neck. Likewise, a character can convey their love by saying thank you, just as well as actually saying I love you. It's up to the actors, musicians, and other artists to sell you on the feelings behind someone's words. The idea that audiences will yawn if they aren't fed memes every few seconds is a falsehood. I suppose there is an audience for that sort of thing, but we'll come back to that in the next slide. The biggest flaw in Melly's statement is claiming to be a storyteller. By itself, that's great. Go write a story and tell it to someone. The issue is that these anime aren't your story to tell. You have to be humble and acknowledge that your job is to convey the story someone else has already written. Crunchyroll doesn't advertise your subs as a reason to join. No, they advertise the show itself, which is what fans are ultimately after. Your job is important, but it's still a supporting role, and the only thing you're trying to make pop with all these lines is your own influence on the work. That, and are you seriously trying to tell me that your work as an esteemed bard, a professional storyteller, amounts to shit like Gigachad? Is a meme really your claim to fame? That's not the flex you seem to think it is. We've also got to address the whole robot thing. Contrary to popular belief, accurate translations don't come off as robotic unless you fail to polish them. It's just a language barrier, and beyond it, those words came from a genuine human writer, who you're insulting by implying a faithful adaptation of their words wouldn't be appealing on their own. Even if you truly feel that way, that's not how most fans feel, and even if it were, I still don't think it would be appropriate to change the dialogue. If you insist on changing the source material like that, again, do it as a fanfic or an abridged series, not an official localization. Even if people genuinely chuckle and enjoy the Gigachad thing, a reasonable critique is that it dates the work needlessly. Gigachad and other memes fall under the same banner of pop culture references that will no longer be relevant in a few years' time. Remember when The Matrix came out, and dozens of other shows and movies tried to capitalize on that hype by doing bullet time parodies? Regardless of how well those references have aged, their existence certainly puts a stamp on when they were made, potentially turning off new viewers who didn't grow up to experience the whole Matrix craze. Technically, Gigachad is a dated reference right out of the gate, as only a specific, terminally online Western culture would understand it. Ironically, you would have to explain the meme to Japanese viewers just so they'd understand why it sucks. Melly here has stated that if one of their pop culture references can stay relevant for 5 years, then they've succeeded, and if people need to Google it, then they've failed. 5 years? What sort of arbitrary shelf life is that? Hell, I'm pissed off hearing my phone, TV, or computer would be outdated in just 5 years, not to mention the content I'd watch on them. I assume Melly is a millennial, and one of the common millennial jokes is complaining how old their childhood treasures have become. Huh? You mean that's already 10 years old? God, I'm old. Why would you want to perpetuate that dilemma? Some of my all-time favorite anime and games came out 30 or so years ago. By the time someone is old enough to get a job, pay for their own home, and afford their own damn subscription to Crunchyroll, they're also old enough to have nostalgia for media long past. So who exactly are you targeting with these memes? I know certain traditions can be toxic, and it's damaging to resist change altogether, but that's not an invitation to scrub the past either. At the very least, I'd like my anime to stay relevant so I could show it to my children if I had any. This art is way too beautiful to let rot after a mere 5 years, and it really says something about the quality of your work, if that's how long you expect to care about it. So yeah, you might be a storyteller, but you're not the storyteller, at least not when you should be accurately conveying another artist's work. The industry may be led by this belief that changing things, spicing them up even, results in more profit, but that's a misguided myth that companies stubbornly cling to. In truth, anime fans nowadays are more educated and eager to experience anime specifically for its Japanese qualities. We don't need things catered to our sensibilities. We don't need things censored to protect us from being offended. If anything, experiencing anime as a Westerner gives us a fun, unique experience that not even the Japanese can have. Even their most familiar cultural staples can enhance our immersion into a fantasy. It's fresh and exotic to us, and that's a good thing. All we ask is to know what the hell the characters are saying, since Japanese is a difficult language. If those anime don't reference Western memes, neither should localizers. If you care about the authenticity of your anime, you need to speak up when this sort of thing happens. Otherwise, there's no hope for change. That's all I've got for now. Be sure to let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Thanks for watching!
If you enjoy this channel, help us grow by liking, commenting, sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and
most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of our anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content.
You can support us directly through Patreon, Subscribestar, or our YouTube membership, all of which come with benefits like exclusive vids and early access.
As always,
celebrate your fandom!
I want to give a special shout out to all my $10 and up supporters: VideoGamer75, Stephen Elak, Samuel Gersten, The Nonchalant Ostrich, Otaku Mom, Jens Bauman, Mystic Samurai 1983, Olympian Doll, Lord Omagoden, Freebrick, RNGer Shuffles 1498, Alexis Yukio Gomez Yamato, Link Pendrago, King Kobo, Observer Bellis, Flash Daniel, Eldon Yarbrough, James Hewitt, Uncanny EXP, Zamas Autonomous, Matthew McAfee, Game King 352, Caitlin P., Vladimir Ovna, Succubus Sakura, Norm Ace, Jonathan Padua, The Taz 96, President Irina Vladimirovna Putina, Maxwell's Demon, Kengo X 77, SF Giants fan Mike, and Akakaze Yume. Thank you all so much.